the Community Seed Exchange, I'm just going to explain a little bit about the organization, and I'm going to be talking about what we do mostly. And using that as the experience to hopefully share and inspire other people. So the Community Seed Exchange, as I said, was started about, I think, 13 years ago. We started mostly as just a sharing seed group that would meet monthly, and people would bring seed and we would share with each other, and we started just accumulating seed and creating just a seed library that was in crates and was just taken to events. About a year and a half into it, we realized that we were always going to be really limited about how much seed we could have because so many people were still learning. And we came up with this idea of, why don't we start a seed garden, and we could be growing and teaching out of that garden, and we would be getting a lot more seed if we were actually growing it. So about 10 years ago, we found a church and we started a seed garden also as a part of our program. We're probably one of the few seed libraries in the United States that is 100% locally grown seed. We don't share any seed that is from other businesses or any seed that's from large corporations. We have just locally homegrown seed, mostly from our own seed garden. And we have, almost 200 varieties in that collection. So we both have an abundant supply of seed, and we also are really, really committed to the idea of locally grown seed. So this is our seed garden. I'll get into the details more. This is some collard greens that are in full bloom, and then in front of it is some beautiful green Ford hook chard that's just beginning to bolt and will be in full bloom shortly. So the seed garden is really the heart of our work. We meet weekly to work in it, and the majority of our seed library is from the seed garden. We also have a seed library that is separate from the public library. We have a room in a church that's right in town, and we keep all of our seed in jars there, and people can come and just get a spoonful of seed. And this is where we have about, I think, 184 varieties right now of seed. We also take some of our seed and put it into the public book library, so that there is seed available there also. We also offer classes once a month to teach about seed saving and some gardening, and talk about pollinators, and we do a range of different classes to really increase the knowledge of people around seed saving in our community. We work with a couple other organizations, and we have one very large annual seed swap. We haven't had it since COVID, but we'll be bringing that back. But that is another way that we get our seed out into the community. So I thought I'd spend the majority of my time, actually a lot of my time in the beginning, really talking about the why, because I've seen over and over again in my years being in this movement that lots of people like to start seed libraries, and then they struggle with what seed are they going to actually be using in those libraries, and they tend to get last year's seed from different businesses throughout the community and then repackage it. And so few seed libraries actually start with a seed garden and then take that abundance and say, oh, let's start sharing it. And I just want to get more and more people on the seed garden side of this movement, and less on just the end product of distributing seed. And I really think that if we're going to change the food system, and we're going to make it more equitable, and we're going to make it more accessible, and we're going to make it healthier, we have to start with seed. And, that first question I have is, do you know where your seed come from? I think that the seed, if we're looking at how do you create a resilient, healthy, local food system, you have to challenge the basis of how we create seed in this world, and that it's dominated by agribusiness, that it's about large-scale farm needs, not nutrition and health and beauty. And so I think one of the ways that we really want to look at and start thinking about seed is how do we challenge that model and make sure that we're bringing that back into our communities and we're caring for it as the commons. And we're saying seed is something that we should be caring for and handing to the next generation. We don't want large agro businesses to be dominating this. We want this to be in the hands of the people. And I think until we do that, we're going to have a massive crisis of the systems that feed us are very vulnerable. We saw during the pandemic when all of a sudden everyone wanted to garden, that our seed racks emptied throughout our community. You couldn't find seed the spring of 2020. And we realized we had this incredible resource. And so we pivoted to try to get the seed out into a larger world by moving to online orders and getting more of our seed out to people, because there was no seed, because the whole supply chain had been disrupted. And it showed us the vulnerability of the system that we'd been talking about for a long time, but had not seen until then. And so, you know, that just strengthening the local food system means strengthening our seed systems. We also really believe that we want to model a sharing economy, which is the basis of kind of the whole seed library movement, which is that we share seeds with one another. And as soon as you start saving seed, you end up with more seed than you ever could use on your own. And it really encourages and supports the idea of let's share it with one another. Another reason to really look at having a seed garden is that seeds will adapt to their location if you grow them over many years. And so the idea of really working to have seed adapted to your bioregion and to your land or area is really something I think modern agriculture has moved to. Let's get hybrids that can be connected to, can grow well anywhere on the planet. And I think that actually has failed us in terms of nutritional food that has good flavor. And if we're moving into places where we have problems of less water, increasing heat, I think we need to be adapting our seed to those situations. And the only way we can do that is by growing it and saving the seed, and growing it and saving the seed, and the seed then adapts. As I said earlier, you know, I got into seed saving because I was hearing about this massive loss of genetic diversity in our foods, and that the hundreds of varieties were being dropped. And, you know, I think that the gardeners of the world will always be the ones who keep the diversity alive. We can't expect farmers to grow 50 varieties of dry beans. They need to figure out how to make money. And so it's really going to be in our hands to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to grow as much genetic diversity as possible. The other reason to start a community seed garden is really to bring people together and to learn together. And that's been the basis, really the most exciting part of what we do, is that we are working together side by side. We learn so much from each other gardening together. And then anywhere that we're is something new that we haven't done before, we get to really learn together as a group. And it's been really special. So those are the things I'm just going to really encourage people, that if we really want to change the food system, if we really want to protect seed, we have to be growing it. And the best way to grow it is actually in community and doing it together. So when you get into this, you need to think about who are your collaborators, who else could be involved, because often there isn't enough. Maybe you have a vibrant, large group already. But you want to think about, are there people who are doing seed swaps? Are there gardening clubs? Are there community organizations that are committed to environmental stewardship that might be interested? Are there agricultural groups, school gardens, churches, master gardeners? There might be seed companies that have a larger support, that are small enough that they support things like seed saving, or maybe there's local nurseries. And so maybe think about who else could you pull in to make this idea of creating a seed garden happen. And then you have to think about, where am I going to find a site? And some of the possibilities are looking to see if your county or city has public land that is available. Churches are one of the largest landowners in most communities, and they often have just a big empty lawn or a big empty space. And I highly recommend people talking with their churches to create those spaces to be more of a service to the community, which is what we've been lucky enough to do. Our garden is on church property, and this church has been really committed to supporting the community. Schools sometimes have access to some land they're not using. Sometimes nonprofits might have an area that they want to create a bigger project, or land trusts are other places in the community. You might think about trying to find property. You need to think about some kind of serious sides, the not fun side to me, of how do you do this? You want to make sure that if you're working on a piece of property that you have a clear lease and that you have insurance if there's anything that goes wrong. We did not have that for a long time, but now have been moving to getting all of those in order. You want to make sure that you have regular work parties. It takes a lot of time and energy to care for a garden. You want to figure out who's going to be the primary contact, because now you have a site. There could be issues that come up where the police want to get hold of someone, or neighbors want to ask you questions about what you're doing. You have to manage your finances. You have to think about fundraising. You have to figure out how are people going to be involved? Is there a membership process? And then you also have to think about what are you going to do with all the seed that you're growing? So when you're thinking about a seed garden, you want to think about how much space do you want and how much do you want to grow? So I think it's really important to first look at your resources, and the number one resource you're going to have is how many people do you have? And we are lucky to have a core group of about 6 people who are committed to working every week in our garden. And then people come and go, so that we often have, up to 8 or 9, 10 people on our work parties every week. And unless this is all you want to do most of the time of your time, it's really important that you get a really strong core group, and that it's not just 1 or 2 people holding it all. You also need to think about how much seed do you want to grow, and do you want to just do it as a little bit of an educational process, or do you want to start really growing a lot of seed for your community? I recommend starting small and then hoping that there's room to increase later, so you don't get in over your head, because it does take a lot of time and energy, quite a bit more time and energy than just growing food. The location, what we've found is that we do need a bathroom. We've been lucky that the church has given us the space, and that the bathroom is, we have a key to the bathroom. You also need to really think about, can you control what other plants are in flower nearby? And so sometimes it's tricky to do a seed garden within a community garden or within a farm, because you might not be able to control what other things are being grown. And so we are right in town, but we feel a little like we're able to control, a half-mile radius around us and understand what else is growing, and so that we can control pollination. You also want your garden to be somewhat connected to your seed library. It doesn't have to be, but it's nice if those can go side by side. So those are just some things to think about as you're beginning to think of doing this. Costs are an issue, and it is probably our biggest expense as a community seed exchange, is that our garden is got the most costs, and besides that we don't have many other costs besides seed envelopes. So you have to think through your water system and irrigation. Do you need to pay for the water? How are you going to irrigate? What do you need to care for your soil? We buy a compost every year. We don't have a really good compost system, so we bring in outside compost, and we do a little bit of soil amending. We've moved from having everyone just bring their own tools to getting a shed and having our own tools. Do you have to pay rent on the land? That might increase. And then we do every year we buy some seed for new varieties that we want to try. Otherwise, we're replanting the seed that we've grown. This is a picture of our seed of our garden. One of the joys of having a seed garden is that it's just a really different type of garden where there's just this abundance and beauty. What you see in flower in the foreground is cilantro. In the way back is celery going to seed. Both of them are great pollinator attractors, so they're just covered in little flies and bees. Then we have some beans up front, and what's fading in the side there is some peas. So these are all plants that are being harvested for seed. In our garden, we only grow plants for seed. We don't do any other growing in our garden. Our garden is about an 80-foot by 75-foot space. We're able to have 16 raised beds, and then we have a field crop area. So we have quite a bit of space. One of the things that is probably the funnest part is to think about what you want to grow. And what we did was set up some ideas about criteria in terms of what do we want to, how do we decide which varieties and what to grow? And so we think about what grows well in our area. We think about what people will actually eat or want to grow, so that we're growing to match some of what people want in their gardens. Sometimes we think about the historical significance or something that might be rare. There's some seeds that are historically significant to our area, and so we try to grow those. And then we have a large group of really strong gardeners, and we look to each other to find favorites and choose our varieties based on what people think really is great. Sometimes we'll trial different varieties so we can get a sense of what we want to grow. So we might grow 4 different things and not actually save seed from them, but to see what might be really great for our area or that we're excited about. The rare thing is we're always kind of tracking, because a lot of us are gardeners and ordering seeds and thinking about what's out there. We're sometimes aware of plants that might be not very available anymore. So sometimes we'll be like, wow, we can't find sweet Valentine lettuce at almost any of these seed companies anymore. So let's start growing it because it's important for someone to keep growing it. So we're tracking that a little bit. There used to be, Seed Savers Exchange used to really have a really good way of cataloging that. They don't come out with it as much anymore, but where you can notice what is being carried by other seed companies or not. Another thing you want to really think about is how hard is it to save seed from this plant. So it's important that in your group you have some seed savers that know a little bit about seed saving, and you might want to start with easier seeds and move into more difficult seeds. You may want to, there's some plants like the brassica family, so broccoli, kale, cauliflower, cabbage, they all will cross with each other. So there's quite a bit of difficulty in keeping those isolated. And so you may want to limit how many of those you can grow, just because it's tricky to deal with pollination. Or if you have to hand pollinate something to keep it true to, you may want to really think about whether you want to take that on. And so I really encourage everyone to start with the easier seeds. There's going to be a seed saving classes as part of this. And if you aren't an expert seed saver, I recommend taking a lot of seed saving classes, but definitely starting with peas and beans and lettuce is a really simple way to get into this and just start to begin to teach and work with seeds. We also have a large pollinator border because we realized we really wanted to increase the amount of pollination that was happening and make sure that things were getting pollinated. And so I recommend that you don't just look at only the plants that you want to save seeds from, but that you have other plants that bring in the pollinators. And so our whole garden is wrapped around with pollinator plants.
Sarah, this is Robin. There's a question about the percentage of perennials versus annuals when you're setting up your garden, your seed garden.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a number for that, but our garden is probably 80% seed crops, which are either annuals or biennials. And then we have about 20% of the garden is perennial pollinator plants. So I just think it's good to wrap your garden around it or have bed ends filled with perennial pollinators, and then have the majority of your garden be growing plants for seed. And we're mostly growing vegetables. We do flowers also, but the majority of what we grow are vegetables and herbs. But we usually do a couple rows of some kind of flower. So one of the things you need to think about when you're doing a garden that's about seed crops is that it's a really different than a regular garden that you're growing just for food. And one of the most important things is you have to understand the size, the number of plants you need to grow, which is called a population size. So in the seed world, to get a really healthy next generation of plants, you want to have a lot of genetic diversity in that population. So to get a really robust future. And so you want to grow a certain number of plants to get that. And population size is really dependent on how that plant is pollinated. So plants that are more self-pollinated can be very small population size, and plants that are wind pollinated need to be fairly large population sizes. So when I'm talking about that, it means like if you're growing lettuce, you should have maybe 8 plants minimum. But if you're growing corn, they recommend 150 plants minimum, because that, and it really is about each plant having its own population size for health and vibrancy. And so that's also why some of the easy plants to save seed from most of those are self-pollinated, which means you don't have to worry much about cross-pollination. And they also, you don't have to grow that many of them. And so that's actually a great place to start because of that, the ease of both the size and the second line, which is you don't have to worry much about cross-pollination. We do want to grow things that we know what they are. So we do like keeping things true. So when we plant something and we say to someone, here's some interest, here's some seed, we want to be able to tell them it is this is butternut squash. I think it's really interesting to not always, I like playing with seed, but when you're doing something that you're going to offer the seed to the community, you want to know what it is. And so we actually don't accept hardly any seed in our seed library that isn't clearly described, and people don't share with us how they actually save the seed. And if they can't tell us if it's been cross-pollinated or not, we often won't offer it if it's one of the ones that crosses abundantly. And so because we just want people to be able to get things that, if they want a squash that's like a butternut, we don't want them to get some strange squash. So we work really hard to make sure our plants are not cross-pollinated and that they are true. And that means you have to think about what else you're growing in your garden. And so we will often only grow one variety of something. So we'll grow one variety of beet or chard, because beets and chards will cross. We will only grow one variety of carrots, because we don't want to have to figure out how to keep them from crossing with other carrots going to seed. You also really need to think about annuals versus biennials. So annuals will produce seed in their first year, which means that it's like a bean. You plant a bean in the spring, it grows, and then it produces its bean seed, and then you can harvest it and you're done by September. Biennials produce seed after they've gone through a vernalization period. So they produce seed in the second year. So those things like beets and carrots are that way. Some of the brassicas are that way. Those plants, you have to think about how long they're going to be in your garden. They can take, up to 1.5 years before you get seed. Leeks are that way. Leeks take forever to dry down. And so when we put a bed into leeks, we assume it's going to be over 1 year before that bed is available. So you really want to think about how long does it take to get to the seed stage, and how many biennials can you really commit to. Depends where you live, how easy it might be to grow biennials. We're in California, and so it is pretty easy to grow them. You don't have to take them out and put them in a root cellar and then pull them back. So we do grow carrots and beets. Another thing you want to think about when you're growing seeds is the size of the plants. That's very different spacing for some plants if you're letting it go to seed. So beets, for instance, if you were growing it to eat, is a small plant that you can plant very closely together. If you're choosing to let the beets, if you're growing beets for seed, you need to space them, up probably 18 inches apart, because then they go to seed, they get huge. And so you want to understand, like, what does this plant look like when it goes to seed? You also want to think through different watering needs. If you're trying to dry down a plant, and I'm speaking mostly from the West western side of United States, where we do have to water. We do want to make sure that we can turn water off so that we can get plants to dry down. I still don't really understand how people save seeds where they get rain all the time, because it's very tricky to dry plants down if it's continuing to rain and keeping them growing. But you want to think about what are the different watering needs. So we actually are able to control the water on every bed in our garden so that we can turn water off when we want it to start drying the seed. We can reduce water if we want to see if it can get stronger for drought. And then we have water on most of the garden for most of the year. So those are the things you really want to think about. And those are true wherever you're saving seed. But if you're starting a community seed garden, you really want to think through, when you're choosing what you're going to grow, these ideas. And I'm going to recommend people look for this resource. I think, Robin, I think I sent you the link. You could put this in the chat. This is from Seed Savers Exchange. They actually have a really good resource guide, a lot of resource guides that are really helpful for seed savers to look at. And so this is one that gives you all the information you need, whether it's an annual, a biennial, or perennial, how it's pollinated, how far away plants need to be to make sure. So isolation distance is how far plants need to be so they don't get cross-pollinated. And then how many plants, population size you need to grow, not just to get viable seed. We always try to stay in this variety maintenance. I sent this area. We're trying to make sure that we keep a variety healthy, and we don't necessarily feel like we have to do genetic preservation, which is much larger sizes and is hard for us in a smaller garden. But we're trying to always grow this number. So we're trying to grow, 15 to 25 amaranths when we save seed from them, or in the beet area, 20 to 50. We usually try to do about 35 beets that we let go to seed. So this is a really great guide for you just to get a sense of how to approach this. And I highly recommend keeping this around for you. It's one of those guides where you're like, oh yeah, I agree with everything I see here. Well done.
So Sarah, a couple of questions have come up. Is this an okay time?
Yeah.
So one person is saying that they have a seed library, but they don't get very many donated seeds. So how to encourage people to donate seeds?
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to find where that network of people who save seeds are, and most gardeners don't save seeds. So what we discovered, and this is why we started the seed garden, is that we weren't getting very many people donating seeds. It was very hard to find people who were seed saving, and it was very hard to get any of those people to bring seed in. And so that's why we started the seed garden, is we realized that if we wanted a seed library that was 100% locally grown seed, we had to grow it, and we had to figure out a way to teach people about seed saving also. And that combination of wanting to have all locally grown seed and then also wanting to have a space to teach people about it led us to starting a seed garden. And so that's what I would recommend. I think it is really hard to get people to bring their seed in. Most people aren't seed savers, and they need to be taught how to save seed. So, I mean, that would be, if you don't have a space for a garden, probably the best thing you can do next is to make sure you have seed saving classes. So you're teaching people how to do it, because it's a lost art in the modern garden world. People have forgotten and have not been taught how to save seed. So if you can't start your own garden, I would recommend you start having classes and bring in people to teach seed saving.
So another question was how to determine how big a plant will get for seed space saving versus, how big it would get if you're just harvesting it for food.
Yeah. Well, some of the books that are out there that are great seed saving books are what I would recommend. They often will describe the spacing you need to put them and a little bit about how large they are. And so that's what I would get, is a good resource book as your basis. I used to use, oh my gosh, my brain just froze of the name of the books, but there's some good ones out there. I'll get back to the names as I recover my brain for a minute. But here, like, this is a great example. This is lettuce. It's a Merlot lettuce. You can see in the corner here, there's a sign. We try to label, our garden is open to the public, and we try to use this as a space for teaching and learning. So we put signage on all of them and explain why, you know, what is good about this plant and why we're excited about growing it. So this is Merlot, and this is going into seed. You can actually see a little bit up here on the top, the florets beginning to produce seed. So we'll probably in a week or two of this picture start shaking the seed into bags. Lettuce seed matures over a period of a couple weeks. So we don't harvest the plant all at once. So we actually shake the tops into brown paper bags and get whatever viable seed is available at that moment, and then come back the next week and shake again. And so over a few weeks, we'll get quite a bit of seed harvested from this. You can see in the background, there's some more over here. There's some more lettuce going to seed too. So that gives you a sense of just how big a small lettuce head can become if you're letting it go to seed. This is sunflowers that we were saving. Some plants are really tricky to save seed from because they are attractive. The seed part is very attractive to the bird world. We've found sunflower seeds to be, you think of them as the easiest thing in the world to save, but they're actually really hard because the birds want to eat them all. So we started bagging them as they were beginning to dry down before the birds could take all the seeds. So we go in and bag each of them and then let them dry down a little more before we harvest them. It's so interesting about sunflowers because they are so easy to, you think of them as something, oh, we can always save sunflower seeds. But we've had problems both with the birds, and we've also had problems with the molding and finding a dry enough place to get them to dry down once we harvest them. So we've actually really struggled with sunflowers as one of our crops. This is a little bit out of focus picture, but this is our carrot planting. This is a dragon carrot, which is a beautiful purple carrot that's open pollinated. And we plant that in July usually. We let them grow and get full to size, and which usually happens by November. We'll have a good size crop. And then we just leave them. And in the winter, we pull them all out and we evaluate them for quality. So we look for kind of true to type sizing and shape. And we pull out the 35 best ones and we replant them. And then this is our carrot seed crop. This is it in full flower. So this is, we planted them in July, early August. We pull them out, evaluate them, and replant them. And then by June, this is what the carrot looks like in full seed. And we have a problem there. We have something called Queen Anne's lace, which is in the carrot family. And so we're always watching and trying to get our carrot seed in before the Queen Anne's lace goes into full bloom. So we're always right on the edge of getting across with Queen Anne's lace, but we find that the carrot goes to seed just a little bit before, so we can harvest all of the early umbels and then move to, and then we don't harvest anything more once there's Queen Anne's lace in bloom. But that's just such a beautiful crop. And so carrots going to seed are also a great pollinator crop. And this will just be humming with small little flies. And so this not only is growing seed, but it also is increasing the activity of pollinators in our garden. So it's doing two things for us here. So what makes our organization really thrive and work? And I just want to say that we are thriving, and we are, I'm just totally blown away by the amount of seed we grow every year and the amount of seed we distribute and share out into our community. And I think there's a few things that have really made that work. One is we have enough people. We have a really strong core group that's very, very dedicated. So we have at least 7 or 8 people who are willing to be there almost every week, who are willing to teach and be teach classes and be engaged at all levels. And I think you have to have that kind of solid core. Otherwise, one person's just going to get burned out pretty quickly. We also started with a lot of seed saving knowledge in the group, so we weren't having to learn everything along the way. And I know a lot of seed libraries in public libraries are librarians trying to learn how to, support their garden community, and maybe don't know much at all about seed saving. So I would start reaching out and trying to find people in your community that know about seed saving so they can help you grow, they can help teach. But it was one of the things that made our group really thrive, was that there was a few of us. It wasn't all just me, but there was several of us who were really committed, big time seed savers and wanting to work with other people. We also, I think it worked because we found a church that was very generous in allowing us to use their property with no cost. And so we don't have to pay rent. So we were able to do this on a fairly small budget. And they've been really supportive of the ongoing work, and they're allowing us to use one of their rooms to store all of our seed and have that be our library. I think the other reason why we've succeeded is that we have a really strong sense of our mission. And it's not just like, oh, we love to grow seed, but we realize the importance of growing seed for the world and for the big picture. We do change this food system? How do we change the world where we're destroying our planet? We think a lot about climate change and how do we make sure that we're adapting plants for a hotter, more irregular climate. And all of that gives us a really strong mission that makes us want to show up every week. But then because we have a strong core and we love seed saving and it's fun, it all comes together so that we have a really super strong group. We also have a lot of experienced gardeners, and you can find a lot of gardeners tend to just like putzing and doing their own thing. And so sometimes they're not the best at working together. But what we've found is that a lot of us were yearning to work side by side with other gardeners and learn from each other. And even though I've been gardening now for 35 years and teach gardening and think of myself as an expert, I always get to learn from the other people that I'm working with, and they bring in new varieties I've never heard of, or they've tried new things that I haven't ever tried before. And it's just been an incredible learning experience to have a group kind of working side by side as peers. So those are the things. Yeah.
Sara, time check, 9:46.
Great. I see the numbers have gotten really large. We're almost at 100 people. So people must be dropping in out of other ones, but
we are at 100 people. Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome everyone who's come in the last bit. There are some things that are hard, and this is what I want to just acknowledge, is that this is a really big commitment to do a community seed garden. It's a lot of work. Plants take a lot of care, and the seed saving process takes a lot of care. When things are about ready to drop seed, you have to get to the garden and harvest your seed. So it's not something that you can just do kind of casually. And there's also just some other things that are hard. One of the things we've found is that there's too many gardeners in one garden. And so sometimes we have to work out how we approach growing things side by side, and people have different experiences in different ways. And so we've been lucky that it hasn't ever been really hard, but it can be some one of the bumps. And you just have to make sure you're figuring out kind of who really gets to make the decisions and how do you make those decisions. We have a small core group of us that really are the ones that hold most of those decisions. As I said, it takes a lot of time and care. And so you need to make sure you have the people power, or you want to think about just doing a few beds where it's just learning together and getting some seed that you want. One of the things we're struggling with in our group is that we're all getting older, and we've been having a hard time pulling in young energy to help us. And it takes a lot to maintain the size of garden we have. The other thing is that sometimes seed crops fail. And so almost every year we'll have something where we get no seed for either all kinds of reasons. We just didn't get to hand pollinating the squash, or the birds came in, or we just forgot about something and it dropped all of its seed. Or we got really bad aphids. We've been, one of the plants I've always grown a lot is kale for seed. And it's been really strange. We've had a couple of years now where we've really not had strong kale seed crops. And it's like the aphids come in and we just haven't been able to get them. And so you just have to use all those as learning experiences. And then we also have to, in the process, after you harvest them, figure out how to keep them from getting moldy or eaten by rats, which means that you have to have somebody who has a good space where they can take them, the seed home to dry it down completely, whether it's a secure dry barn or an extra room in their house, and they're willing to have the seed go home with them, or you have to have it wherever you are. We don't have a place to store the seed while we're processing it, and so we all take it home to our spaces. So those are things to think about. But it's so worth it. This is, we started having a day in the fall where we gather to process all of our seed. And so we will process seed through the season a little bit, but then we have one big gathering where we really celebrate. And this is all the seed we cleaned in one morning that came from our seed garden. And just this, it's just such an incredible celebration of all that we can do together and how much food, how much seed we can grow when we come together and do it as a group. And it's so worth it. There is I'm going to wind down just a couple things. Well, actually, I'm going to go back because we have 10 minutes. So I'm just going to see if there's any questions about doing a seed garden. This is a moment where we're really open to hearing what questions people have. And if not, then I'll just share a little bit more. But Robin, are there any questions?
So someone was asking, they have a problem with people stealing their edibles, and they were wondering if you have any, but that's maybe sort of off topic with the seed library.
No, it's true. I think that is a good point. We started having a lot of theft. We started a garlic program, which is not seed saving because it's just sharing garlic, and we're doing a community garlic collection where we're trying to have a large group of people caring for a fairly large collection of garlic varieties. And we found garlic to be very susceptible to being stolen because people would walk in the garden and there was some mature garlic and they would just take it. And so we actually started locking our garden when we're not there because we were getting so much vandalism. Not vandalism, but just theft. And it's hard, and then also we are noticing things like onions, sometimes beets were getting taken. And when you are working on a population size, so you think you have a large enough population and someone comes in and harvests 10 beets and you don't have the population size anymore, it means that your whole seed crop maybe isn't going to be worth saving. And so when we realized that that was happening, we decided to lock the gate and only have it open when we're there. And unfortunately, that was the decision we made. But it is true that if a public space is available, people will probably, and they see plants just sitting there, they might take it. And so that was our decision when we started losing too much. At first, it was like, okay, we're going to lose some here and there. That's okay. But then we realized it wasn't worth it anymore. Especially something like beets, where you're like, it's a long process to get beet seed. And all of a sudden you're losing your beets. It can be such a bummer. It's not worth it.
So another question about how do you know the seeds are pure, that they haven't been cross-pollinated, and how many years do you need to have the seed garden before the seeds are adapted to the local region?
Yeah. So the purity is, you can be really being just very careful about whether there's other varieties within the area that could cross with it. So you need to know what it will cross with. But you really can't always know until you regrow it and you start to see some changes. So And we're not super careful. We're kind of careful. And so like we have a beautiful Tarbay bean. And the other day last year we grew it. And when we went to harvest, there was 3 of the plants were producing a black bean instead of a white bean. And so that was like, oh, this somehow got crossed out. And so sometimes you don't see it till the next generation when you're planting them out and seeing them. We do ask people who take seed from the garden, I mean, from the seed library, to let us know if they got something that didn't come true to type. And every once in a while we will hear of something. And so we have a big sign, and we recommend anyone who has a seed library to make sure you have a sign that says, you know, all of this was grown by volunteers and local people in the community. We have no guarantees. This is free seed, and we've tried our best to have it be true to type, but we can't guarantee it. So that's kind of the way we approach it. What was the second question, Robin?
Well, how long do
How
you
long? Yeah.
do
How
you,
long for adaptation?
yeah.
It really depends on the plant, but mostly I've heard kind of 7 to 8 seasons. So it takes a long time. You want to be growing it. And so we actually have some crops that we've basically committed to, like these are the 3 beets we're growing. And so we rotate 1 beet, and the next year another beet and another beet, and then we start over again. So we are regrowing them over and over. Or we have 3 different corns we grow. We're really committed to growing dry corn, not because lots of people want to grow it, but because we think it's such an important crop for a kind of resilient food system. And we love the tradition of growing dry corns and processing it and eating it. And so sometimes we'll grow things that lots of people don't take, but we really want to keep them in the world of seed saving and people growing them.
And grains are interesting to grow also.
Yeah, grains are really interesting. We grew a lot of wheat for years, and we also grown barley, amaranth, and quinoa. We've loved growing all of those. We started working with a woman who was really involved with kind of pulling a lot of the rare varieties of wheat from the USDA food seed bank. And she started growing them out, and she needed people to help her grow a lot of varieties. And so we were doing the initial grow out, where we would get like 20 seeds, and then we would grow it and give her back, you know, a couple cups of seed, 1,000 seeds, so that she could then take it to the next level. And when we were doing that, we were growing probably 12 different varieties of really rare wheat. And that was super interesting and fun.
Another question was, where do you get your starting seed? And maybe you covered that earlier, but does it start as commercial seed and evolve or adapt from there? And or did it come from other seed savers?
Mostly we buy it. We have a few seed companies that we really love. We look for organic seed. We look for small scale seed growers. We look for seed growers or seed companies that do a lot of their own breeding and work with seed. So like we look for a seed that maybe is in a similar climate. So we often buy seed from seed companies in the Pacific Northwest that is similar to us, because we have a little bit of fog also and cooler temperatures. We try to support small seed companies as much as possible. And we also support those who are committed to 100% organic. And so what we do every January is a group of us sits and goes through our list of what we normally grow out. And then we talk about new varieties that we're excited about. We look through seed catalogs and see anything that might be worth trialing or seeing if we wanted to grow, because someone we respect is recommending it. And so then through that, we figure out what we want to grow. Because we have such a strong group of gardeners, that there's usually at least 3 or 4 of us who are really tracking varieties that do well in our area and things that we love. In my other garden, not the community seed garden, but in my garden that I work in, 4 years ago, I trialed 14 different kales. And then from that, I learned a lot about what I really liked or didn't like. And then we've been doing kale seed saving based on some of that trial work, just to get a sense of what we love. So that's kind of how we approach getting the seed. But sometimes people will show up with seed and say, this is something I love. I've been growing it for a long time and will take it on as something to continue. So both and. Any other questions, Robin?
There was a question, do you get any organic seed from Mexico?
We don't. I don't have a good source there, so no.
Yeah.
We're really excited about the seed companies that are emerging in, especially the Pacific Northwest, that are really small, that really match kind of a similar climate and are doing great breeding work. So Wild Garden Seeds or Adaptive Seeds or Uprising Seeds, Siskiyou Seeds, those are all places that we're tracking what they're doing. We're also, we often will buy seeds from High Mowing. We really like their commitment to keeping a lot of varieties open source, and also their commitment to 100% organic. So that will be sometimes the largest seed company we'll go to is that.
And I guess we're just about out of time, but there was a question, how do you rotate your crops through your seed garden?
Yeah, we have a master Excel spreadsheet person who maps everything we plant and is always making sure that we're rotating crops so that we're not growing the same thing in the same place. So we have a field crop area that we've divided into quarters, and so the corn moves through the 4 quarters, and then the squash follows, and then sunflowers and tomatoes and other things kind of rotate through that. So we have one person who's really in charge of just mapping and thinking through rotation so that nothing's growing in the same place twice.
So I guess we're out of time, but I wanted to let everyone know that I have been saving the chat, and we can all the presentation is going to get posted, and we're recording, and I can try to put some of the links from the chat. There were several good books that were linked. We'll put that as part of our resource that gets shared. And there is a survey that it would be great if you could fill out to let us know what you thought about this session. And yeah.
Great. And then just a reminder, this movie, it's a great movie. I saw it a couple of years ago when we had it as part of this. And if you link, you can, it will be available for $10 to stream. It's really inspiring, and it will really hopefully inspire you to think more about how can we grow more. So, well, thank you everyone for what you do and your interest in seed saving. And hopefully you'll be inspired to grow more seed. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.